Well, thank you, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to Northwest Spotlight. Once again, we are very, very happy today to have with us David Malsby. And David works with the PTSD Foundation, and I may have that. It's a PTSD Foundation of America. And David, I guess the first question that a lot of people have in this regard is, can you help define what PTSD is?
There's a lot of misconception out there, especially when it comes to our military and combat veteran community. But it's kind of the normal reaction to a very abnormal situation or trauma in somebody's life. Anyone can deal with PTSD because we all at some point have some varying degrees of trauma. So anyone can be put in a situation where they're dealing with post-traumatic stress, but in our world, deal with it with combat vets. It oftentimes shows itself through the hyper anxiety, lack of self-worth, I guess I should say, causing people to start to isolate and self-medicate to deal with the issue. And that's kind of where it all gets started.
And what is the PTSD Foundation of America, David? How would you best explain what it is you do?
We're serving America's combat veterans and their families who are dealing with post-traumatic stress. We are very specific about that. It has to be combat related for someone to be a part of our program. Now, that actually can mean and include civilians. And while most people never really thought of it, after the withdrawal from Afghanistan, late August, people heard a lot about the SIVs, and it's people who were contractors. And for instance, we've had contractors in our groups that were civilians, but they geared up with our military, went out and deployed with our military, doing interpretation on some of their patrols. So they dealt with every kind of trauma you can deal with in combat. They just didn't happen to be working as a soldier or a Marine or something along that line. They were a paid contractor. So we deal with combat related post-traumatic stress, and we do that in a couple different ways, a few actually. Our core is the peer-to-peer. So that's one veteran who's gone through our program helping the next veteran. That grows into groups. We run support groups. Anyone familiar with any type of support group, whether it be Alcoholics Anonymous, divorce recovery, we run those groups across Texas and in several cities across the country. We also do them like we're doing this interview right now through Zoom technology. Everything we do is very confidential. The other part that people, if they've heard of us, is generally because of the residential portion of what we do, and that's Camp Hope. And that's where we bring veterans in from every era of war. We've had several Vietnam vets coming through our program, to guys that are just now walking out of Afghanistan. We bring them in, do a residential program where they live with us 6 months, sometimes over a year, depending on what's going on with them, how complex it has become in their life. And we deal with every single aspect of their life once they come into our program. It's not just that combat PTSD. To deal with that, we often have to go way, way back into traumas that happened long before they ever deployed.
Exactly. Wow. That says a lot. It really does. Just briefly tell the folks what got you here.
Sure. Well, my background is pastoring. That's what I've been doing. I came into the realization of what was happening in our military and veteran community back in 2009, spring of 2009. At the time, we were based in Houston, so that's where we started. The statistic was 1 out of every 3 adult homeless persons were United States military veterans. The VA was telling us we were losing more than 14 a day to suicide. And then that number grew, and kind of the number 22 is what's been made public. We actually believe it's more than that, but whether it's 14 or 3 or 22, it's too many. So in May 2009, just started hitting the streets of downtown Houston, meeting some of our veterans who are homeless. Hey man, what's your story? Why are you and your family living in the truck? what's going on? How can we help you? And that's where it all began. Just meeting one-on-one with guys, hey, let's have a cup of coffee or let's have lunch, and working with them one-on-one. Then it turned into the groups, and then it turned into the residential portion 3 years later.
That is an incredible story. And I'm sure just so people may or may not know, we've had to reschedule this interview a few times just because of your schedule being so full every single day. And again, I certainly appreciate you taking a few minutes out of your day here. What is Camp Hope?
The Camp Hope is the residential portion. And again, we're bringing vets from all across the country. We have right now about 70 veterans living with us. Throughout COVID, we've had up to 95 a couple of times, which is actually beyond our capacity. But we have about 70 live with us right now. And it's an all-day program. It starts at 7 o'clock in the morning with, let's get up and, do some chores around the house. We do prepare the breakfast meal for them, the evening meal for them, provide the food for lunch. But they're in classes throughout the day. And that includes both PTSD and what PTSD is, what happened in the rewiring of their brain because of the trauma and dealing with war, what happened when they came home. And then it gets into a lot of different classes on a wide variety of subjects, from anger management and emotion regulation, self-esteem, self-care, relationships, all the way up to how to write a thank you note, how to write a resume, and how to interview for jobs. We deal with the full gambit while they're with us.
That's phenomenal. And you mentioned earlier that it's somewhat similar to a 12-step type program where it's, unless you've experienced this, and anyone that's seen anything about veterans and been interviewed, they're pretty upfront about the fact, unless you've experienced this situation, you're not going to be able to relate to it. And so in that regard, why is it necessary then for you to work with veterans who need to stay at Camp Hope? And in that regard, there's obviously a neurological disorder, and then I would imagine there's cross addictions going on as well that are trying to mask or cover up. So how do you deal with all of that when someone comes to you?
Well, our program obviously has morphed over time from the beginning, where we just trying to get them into a safe place so we could talk to them as much as we could about the actual trauma. As we began working on that and growing our program and developing our program, we've brought in networking with licensed professional counselors. So while they're with us, the core of the program is peer-to-peer, but they also have weekly meetings with licensed professional counselors. And then, of course, professional psychiatrists and psychologists through the VA system as well.
Right.
And in addition to that, we try to expose them to as many healthy tools as we possibly can. So it can be art therapy, it could be equine therapy, it could be deep sea diving. What helps one person may be different from what helps another person. So we're just trying to expose them to as many healthy growing opportunities as we possibly can, because you did mention the addiction. The vast majority, probably 85% of the guys that come into our program have been self-medicating for years. Some of our Vietnam guys have been self-medicating for decades, and the addiction stuff.
Yeah, it sort of makes sense when you're trying to cover up or mask something that's happened to you and just get away from it emotionally. That just becomes a deeper dive. So again, we're talking to Dave Malsby. He's the director of the PTSD Foundation of America. You mentioned 22 a day. That right now, can you just briefly explain what the 22 a day situation is? And is that still the same, or is it getting worse, or kind of where are we with that?
So the 22 a day came from a guesstimate that the VA put out a few years ago. They didn't have every state reporting at the time their suicides in the veteran community. So they were doing a guess. Now they say it's 20.3 a day. We still think that's low, and we're talking about suicides per day. So
Right.
we still think that's low. Not that we really want to have a fight or argument with anyone over what the actual number is, but I can tell you anecdotally, I've talked to an awful lot of family members who've lost loved ones. It was pretty clear what was going on, but it wasn't ruled a suicide by the coroner, the medical examiner. And again, I don't want to argue with anybody over those. All I know is they're not with us anymore, and we're doing everything we possibly can to stop that.
And the percentage of the people that go through your program, do they then again become more involved with PTSD Foundation of America as they go through the program and kind of branch out and help other veterans out there kind of in the world?
Yeah, well, the program staff at our organization, every one of them have come through our program.
Great.
Obviously, we've had some over 1,600 veterans live with us for some period of time over the last 10 years. Obviously, we can't employ 1,600 people, but many of them do remain involved. Many of them go on with their life, and we like to talk about it as a new trajectory in their life. No one comes into Camp Hope on a winning streak. It's kind of one of the things we talk about. So we want to change that trajectory, and whatever the go forward is, and we want to help them go forward. But our program is run by veterans who've come through our program, and others will volunteer. They volunteer while they're in the program. There's a requirement for a certain number of volunteer hours to graduate from our program. Doesn't have to all be with us, but we certainly do give them opportunities to do so.